the war was over, and the troops came marching home. The final summit conference of the three wartime allies took place in a palace in the Berlin suburb of Potsdam. Truman, Churchill, and Stalin came to plan the peace and to redraw the map of Europe. Their different economic systems offered alternative paths to prosperity, but the Great Depression continued to cast its long shadow.
There's no doubt that at the end of World War II, there was a tremendous loss of faith in the market economy. You had a feeling in large parts of the world, we don't want to go that way. We want to go a better way.
In Britain, the troops were coming home to a general election.
Well, I came back in a troop ship in the summer of 1945. I was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and I was picked as a 19-year-old to be the Labour candidate. All these soldiers all said, never again, we're never going back to unemployment, Great Depression, to fascism, to rearmament. We want to build a new society.
During the dark war years, Britain had been governed by a coalition of conservatives and socialists. Winston Churchill, the great wartime leader and head of the Conservative Party, expected an easy victory. Everywhere he went, huge crowds turned out to cheer the nation's hero. Heading the campaign against Churchill was Clement Attlee, leader of the Labour Party. Attlee argued that Britain had planned the war, and now planning would win the peace.
We knew that our people would never have stood the bombardments and the loss of life and the hardship if they hadn't been confident that their government was operating a policy of fair shares. We set out to ensure this system of fair shares and of planning and controls continued after the war.
Churchill, who was influenced by Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, opposed planning and controls.
No socialist system can be established without a political police, some form of Gestapo.
He got carried away with this Gestapo. And this, of course, it was carrying things to absurdity, Gestapo, in Britain.
Attlee, a mild-mannered Christian socialist, gave Churchill's gaffe a sinister spin.
Attlee actually went out of his way to refer to this foreign professor with this Friedrich August von Hayek, this foreign chap with a slightly German accent.
Britain went to the polls. The result was sensational.
Here is the state of parties up to 3 o'clock in detail. Conservatives, 180. Labour, 364.
Churchill was out. The people had voted for a new socialist Britain.
The Labour Party swept to power simply because the vast majority of people, particularly those men and women in the fighting forces who lived through the dreadful Depression years of the 30s, just said, Churchill's done a fine job of war leader, but we don't trust him to win the peace.
What kind of society do you want?
Attlee promised his party that they would build a new Jerusalem.
Let's go forward into this fight in the spirit of William Blake. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall the sword sleep in my hand,
till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.
William Blake's hymn, Jerusalem, became an anthem for the labor movement.
You know, it seemed to people who'd been through a war, it seemed to them natural justice. Why not pool your resources? And so we broke into the concept of the sacredness of private property.
When labor took power, private owners were compelled to sell their businesses. Labor created a mixed economy in which newly nationalized industries coexisted with private enterprise. Now, government-owned industries like coal, rail, and steel no longer enriched owners and shareholders, but worked for the common good.
So it was an act of regeneration, of renewal. That was the hope. And it was a hope that gave us the welfare state, gave us the National Health Service, gave us full employment, gave us trade union rights, really rebuilt the country from the bottom up.
The welfare state provided care, free of charge, from womb to tomb. Nobody, rich or poor, would need to fear poverty, ignorance, unemployment, ill health, or old age.
And people said, this is better than allowing a lot of gamblers to run the world where they're not interested in us, but only in profit.
Russia ended the war as a military and industrial giant. With the Red Army and the secret police, Stalin imposed his economic system on half of Europe.
The planned economy of Lenin and Stalin had defeated fascism. Scientific socialism seemed to be in the ascendancy.
Socialism was on the march. Capitalism and free markets were on the retreat.
So about 1/3 of the world adopted socialism, sometimes through internal revolution, sometimes through brutal imposition by the Red Army.
The world was divided. The Cold War had begun. Hayek loved mountains. He said they breathed freedom. But he saw socialist ideals and the planned economy as threats to freedom. And so he organized a conference at a formerly fashionable hotel on the top of Mont Pelerin, Pilgrim Mountain.
Well, what happened in 1947 was that Hayek at last brought off a great dream, which was to assemble 36, mostly economists, some historians, a few journalists, a handful of what he regarded as survivors, good eggs, good intellectuals, who understood the market economy and the whole of the case.
This was Hayek's belief, and the belief of other people who joined him there, that freedom was in serious danger.
One of the delegates was a young economist from Chicago, Milton Friedman.
And the point of the meeting was very clear. Hayek and others felt that the world was turning toward planning, and that somehow we had to develop an intellectual current that would offset that movement.
They met downstairs in the cocktail bar. The room and its furniture are not much changed.
The whole world shadowed by the Iron Curtain, the Russian threat, by the failure to establish democracies in the Eastern European countries, and by the prevalence everywhere, intellectually, of these ideas of collectivism. arising from the war. The argument always was that democracy is impossible without a free economy. You need a free economy. A free economy is a necessary, though not a sufficient condition for democracy.
The debates were passionate. At one point, Hayek's former mentor, Ludwig von Mises, stormed out of a meeting.
In the middle of a debate on the distribution of income, in which you had people whom you would hardly call socialist or egalitarian, people like myself, Mises got up and said, "You're all a bunch of socialists," and walked right out of the room.
But Hayek told the meeting that they had one great lesson to learn from the socialists.
Hayek paid enormous tribute to the socialist intellectuals and said that the great strength of the socialists is that they had the courage, he said, to be idealistic, to have a theory, to have a project, to have a vision, and to go on working towards that through thick and thin.
As the meeting came to an end, Hayek predicted a long fight, a battle of ideas that might last 20 years or more before the world changed its mind. In the meantime, Hayek could see only one gleam of light.